Hello gamers, my name is Spark, and today I'm going to show you an awesome one-of-a-kind tool that you can use at your D&D or other TTRPG table. In this video I'm going to show you an illegal acquisitions generator. It's going to focus on burglary and pickpocketing. This is a great tool for GMs who have players who like to do a little bit of thievery. Be advised, I built these generators specific to D&D 5e, but with just a little bit of tweaking they can work for basically any TTRPG. Here's how this video is going to go. For starters, I'm going to show you the basics of how this tool works and how you can use it at your table. Then I'm going to show you what's happening behind the scenes that makes the generator work and how you can customize it to better fit your campaign. Just to give you an idea of what we're looking at here, we have an expansion section over here. This is the Burglary generator. If we minimize that, the Pickpocket one was underneath it. And so we have two different generators here. We have Burglary and Pickpocketing, and I'm going to show you both of those. We're going to start with Burglary. As with all of my generators, there are four different sections. We have the Settings section, we have the Results section, we have the Generate button that turns the whole system on, and then we have the Storage system, which if you scroll down, you can see down here the record of illegal acquisitions for burglary, and then if you expand the pickpocket section, you will see that there's a record of illegal acquisitions for pickpocketing. Let's start off by looking at the settings here. So this generator is about generating stuff that your players might find as they are raiding a certain location, especially or specifically a building. And so you'll notice this first section of settings it gives you an opportunity to say, where are your players looting from? Is it the bedroom? Is it the foyer, hall, or sitting room, kitchen or dining area, office or study, or is it a storage or cellar area? Now, obviously these five do not encompass every single type of room that a house or an estate might have, but that's why we have a checkbox system here. Let's say the room that your players are looting is a interesting combination of a foyer and an office type study. Like whatever room it is that they're in, you would say it's a combination of those two things. Then you can check both of those boxes and you will get results that are from both of those categories of rooms. Each one of these five room settings has their own list of loot that might be generated. And so whichever checkboxes you turn on will influence what types of things are being generated. And I'm going to show you that in detail on the back half of this video. For the sake of this example, let's just start with the bedroom. Now over here in types of loot, this allows you, the GM, to control what types of goods are your players going to find in this particular location. Currently it's set to custom, and if you've seen any of my other generators, you know that custom turns off this particular checkbox system and it pulls from an odds table that we will look at in the back half of this video in the custom settings area. But if you don't want to deal with that, we can also just turn it to random. This section turns on and you can now control via the checkboxes what type of loot might be found in that bedroom. So for example, you might say, well, it makes sense that there would be apparel, maybe some cash and consumables, but I don't know about documents, I don't know about gems, I don't know about weapons, and probably not magical items. So you get to decide, okay, so in this bedroom there could be any of these four categories of loot that your players might find. So again, if you want to go off of an odds table where each of these 8 different types of loot has its own percentage likelihood, then you're going to set this to custom, and we're going to look at those percentages later. Or if you want to just go off of the checkboxes, you set it to random, and then those are there. Underneath that, you can set the target's wealth. Are we raiding a lord's estate, in which case maybe you say they're upper class, or are you raiding just some peasant, maybe it's impoverished, anywhere in between. So you get to set that, or you can set it to random. And then you can also turn on DCs. You can see down here in the results, there will be the item that gets generated and its DC. Now the DC, which stands for difficulty challenge, represents how hard it will be for your players to find that item in that location. So harder items will have higher DCs. Like if I was the DM here, I would probably say it's a perception or an investigation check to find something. And if they roll an investigation check and their roll is lower than the DC, then they don't find that item. That's how I would use that. And then over here in these 3 boxes, you can set how many items are going to be generated in the easy, medium, and hard columns. Right now it's set to 5, 3, and 2, but you can set anywhere between 0 to 10, or you can set it to random. So for the sake of this example, let's do easy on random, We'll do medium on 4 and then hard on 2, and that should give you a variety of how this generator works. And then you have these last 3 settings where you can decide, is the room trapped? Could there be traps in this room protecting some of this stuff? You can set it to yes, no, or maybe. If it's set to maybe, it's based on an odds table that we will look at in the back half of the video in the custom settings. Otherwise, you can say yes, the room is absolutely trapped, or no, it's not. We'll leave it on maybe for now. Is the room occupied? Is there somebody in the room? A humanoid specifically. Again, yes, no, or maybe. And then does the room have a creature? So this would be like, is there an animated armor that's on guard there that the players haven't noticed? Is there a dog that's sleeping in the corner? Is there a bird that's tucked away in a cage? If this generates that there is some type of creature, then obviously I as the GM will use that to make a little bit more of a dynamic interaction in the room. You know, my players are trying to sneak into the room, and I would have them roll some type of perception check or stealth check to notice or try to get past the dog that's asleep in the corner or something like that. So you can set these to yes, no, or maybe on all 3 of these. So I'm going to set occupied to maybe so we can get some variety, and let's click generate and see how this looks. So it has generated 6 easy items that are in this bedroom or bedroom-like room. We have our 4 medium items and we have our 2 hard items. And so you can see what is in this room and what will be very easy for your players to find. You can see what might be a little bit harder for them to find, and then you can see the really tough things. Now, just because the items are hard to find does not necessarily mean that they will be valuable. I toyed around with the idea of making sure that the hard items were always the valuable items and the easy items were always the low value items, but I realized that the versatility or the randomness of that was better, because who knows how this particular NPC has set up their room, where things are hidden. Maybe they have a really expensive sword that they're used to carrying around, but they decided to just set it up in the corner this time. And maybe they've got their bag of gold, which normally they might keep in a chest, but for whatever reason, maybe they were spending some money or counting it or whatever, it's just sitting out on their desk, right? It just depends on the life of the NPC whose home is being raided. And so that's why I left everything random. Now in this example, we can see that the room does contain at least 1 trap. And as the GM, I might roll a die to decide if it's on one of the easy, medium, or hard items. I might just individually pick the one that's worth the most. So this just tells you what's in the room, and then you as the GM need to give it place, right? I could have gone into more detail saying it's in a chest beneath a floorboard or something like that, but I realized, no, it's your world. I don't know exactly where your players are going to be. I don't know what type of homes you're setting up. I don't know if this is a lord or a peasant or what their housing situation is going to be or anything like that. And so I left all of that to you. I'm just telling you what's in this room, and you're going to have to give it place. The room is currently occupied, and again, this implies occupied by a humanoid, an intelligent creature. Probably in this case, given that it's a bedroom, I would say there's probably somebody asleep in the bed, or maybe there's a bassinet with a child or something like that, and there is no other creature in the room. And this right here does tell you the target wealth of the place that is being burgled. In this case, it's a middle class. Now remember, we set that to random, but if I were to change this to impoverished, it would say impoverished, and it'll say impoverished every time. But if we set it to random, then of course it will cycle through randomly depending upon the odds table, which we can look at later. So as I mentioned earlier, each type of room is going to have its own types of loot. We're going to look at that table later in the second half of the video. But for the sake of you just getting an idea of what this generator can do, I'm going to turn everything on. All rooms, all types. I'm going to set the quantity to 10 and the room details to yes. This might be a good opportunity for you to pause the video and take a look at what some of the results are and the DCs if you're curious. So having looked at that, let's minimize the burglary section and take a look at the pickpocketing section. The pickpocketing generator is exactly what you would expect it to be. It's if you have a player who's looking to pick the pocket of somebody, some NPC or something, and you want to randomly generate what might they find in their pocket, their saddlebag, their satchel, what's on their person. Rather than you just having to come up with that, you've got the pickpocket generator, you can just cycle it really quick. Let's take a look at the settings. You can select what type of person is this that they're pickpocketing. Is this an adventurer, a clergy, a commoner, combatant, magical? So this would be like a war mage or somebody who is very skilled in fighting with magic. You've got a combatant martial, which is your fighter essentially. You've got an elite, this would be your upperclassmen, and then you've got a scholar, these are your acolytes, your studious people, whatever. And again, just like up with the burglary one, where you could mix multiple checkboxes together to kind of create, maybe you've got like this paladin type figure that your players are trying to pickpocket, and so you would maybe combine martial, magical, and clergy using those 3 checkboxes to kind of define who this character is that they're trying to pickpocket in, you know, who you've decided is a paladin or something. Maybe you have somebody who's a rich scholar, and so you do an elite scholar combined. So you can mix and match the checkboxes to create what type of person it is that they're pickpocketing. And again, the reason you would do that is because each of these 7 different types of people are going to have their own list of the type of stuff that they might have on their possession. Again, you have your generate DCs. Now there are 2 DCs on this one. We have DC to see and DC to lift. DC to see is how you can determine if your players notice that that NPC is carrying that item. So let's say the item that gets generated is a magical dagger. Well, how do your players know that they're carrying that magical dagger? Will your players see that there is a fancy dagger that's tucked behind their cloak on their back? That's what the DC to see is. And then there's the DC to lift, and that is how difficult is it for them to actually get that. So for me, I would have this be a perception check for the DC to see, and then the DC to lift would be your sleight of hand check. So you have your DC to see, your DC to lift, or pull in this case. You have your item quantity, you can set between 1 and 5 or random, and the target quantity. Now you can have up to 3 targets. I'm going to scroll down a little here. You've got target 1, and that's this section here, target 2, and then target 3. So maybe your players are looking at this group of people, or there's a crowd, or they're in a tavern or something, and you want to generate more than just one person that they might try to pickpockets. You can generate up to 3 targets, or you can set it to random. For the sake of this though, we'll just start with 1. And then you've got your type of loot, and it's the same list as the burglary list. And again, you can mix and match or set it to custom, which will pull off of the odds table in the second half of the video. So having looked at the settings, let's go ahead and just generate somebody. So here we have some easier loot to pick and some harder loot to pick. Now you'll notice we have a lot of consumables in this list. In fact, this person has all consumables with some cash. Now why is that? Because we have this selected to an elite scholar, which is affecting the draw table. If we wanted to mix this up a little bit, we could say this is a magical, like a battle mage. So we can select that, and then you see we have some apparel, weapons, consumables, and cash. So looking at this, right, we got a ring, a dart, some magical dust. You can see the DC to see, the DC to lift, and then that's the easier stuff, and the harder stuff, which is just their gold pouch, is over here, DC to see, DC to lift. Let's go ahead and mix it up a little bit. Let's go with a commoner adventurer type mix. So you can see we got a spell book, couple weapons, some gold, another weapon. Let's turn the custom into random to give it a little more versatility. Let's go back. Let's create this really rich fighter guy. There you go. You've got some magical items, some cash, some weapons, some consumables. So there you go. That demonstrates what the pickpocket generator can do. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to up the target quantity to random. I'm going to turn all of these on, and this might be a good opportunity for you to pause to get an idea of what this generator can do. Now, if you're not a huge fan of what some of these lists are producing, if you think they're too narrow or you want more variety, in the second half of this video, when we look at customization, you can change and affect what are in the master lists and what is likely to be generated given the type of person whose pocket is being picked. So there's a ton of customization versatility here that you can do if you're not a huge fan of the things that are being generated currently for the given targets. Okay, so that's it for the function of the burglary and pickpocket generator. I do want to show you how to store stuff. So let's come down here to the record of illegal acquisitions. So this is where you are going to store what people had in their pockets or what was in the rooms of the buildings that you generated for the burglary. Both this storage system and the burglary storage system operate the exact same way. So the idea here is if you have like target number 3 here, and the stuff that was on their person, if you wanted to save this list, then it's a bit tricky because these are all dynamic cells. And what a dynamic cell is it's a cell that will regenerate or refresh when anything changes anywhere in the spreadsheet. So for example, if I just come down here and click delete, you can see that everything is cycling through, and that list that we did have here is now gone, and it's gone forever. You'll never get it back because these are dynamic cells. So if you wanted to save this list, let's come up here to target 2. If you wanted to save this, you would want to select everything there. You want to copy it, and then you're going to come down here into stack number 1, and you're going to expand it, or stack 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. And then you're going to come into the area where you want to paste it, and you're going to right click, paste special, values only. And now you have that list that was just up there, and if I press delete now, nothing cycles. And so this is no longer, these are no longer dynamic cells, they are solid and they will not change, but you do have to make sure that you do paste special values only. If I were to just do a regular paste, if I just come here and go paste, you'll notice that some of the formatting got weird, and this is no longer right. This is absolutely not the way we want it to be. And if you look up here in the formula bar, you can see that we have formulas down here, which we absolutely don't want. So right click, paste special values only, and now there are no formulas up here, it's just the text, and that's how you're going to save it. You can minimize this section, and you'll notice up here it says stack 1 has 2 openings. If you expand this, that's because we have 1, 2, and 3 places to store stuff. Number 1 has stuff in it, 2 and 3 don't, and that's why you have 2 openings left. If we were to type something in there, you see it goes down to having 1 opening, 0 openings. You can minimize that and it still keeps track of all of that and you don't lose anything. So this is a really easy way for you to store information so that dynamic cells don't get rid of anything. And again, as I said, exactly how I just explained this working for the Pickpocket is exactly how it works for the Burglary. Again, the Burglary storage system, expand the Burglary section, come down here, and here's the Burglary storage area, and it functions the exact same. And that's it for the basic functionality of this illegal acquisitions generator. By the way, this isn't my only generator. I have dozens of others that I think you'll find interesting. This table that you see on screen now shows all the generators that I've created and which of them, at the time of publishing this video, have video tutorials like this one. All of my generators are available for download at buymeacoffee.com for just a couple bucks. Links are in the description. If you're enjoying this video, now would be a great time to share it with other gamers. Please hit the like button and subscribe, it really helps me out. Now, it's customization that sets my random generators apart from all the others. If you're a widely experienced GM, this probably isn't your first random generator that you've ever toyed around with, but it will probably be your last. No other tool has allowed you to customize the code and the master lists so that you can personally craft your own spectrum of results. So let's take a look at customization now. You'll notice down here at the bottom we have our 2 different tabs, and we have the Ref tab. If you click on the Ref tab, we come to 2 different major sections. We have the Burgle section and the Pickpocket section. So let's expand the Burgle section. Our first subsection here is Settings and Functions. We expand that out. And here is the odds table for the target wealth if you set it to random. Remember back over here under Burgle, target wealth was right here, and we could set it to either of those 4 settings or set it to random, and when it is random, it will pull from this table. So it shows there's a 10% chance of random, 20% of upper class, and so forth. You can change these odds, okay? Don't change this or this, but you can change these odds and just make sure that they add up to 100%. You can ignore all of this stuff here in the gray. That's just part of the functionality of the generator. Now this table has to do with the loot type odds. If we come back here again, we have types of loot, and right now it's set to random, which means it will just pull from the checkboxes that you have designated here. But if we set it to custom, I told you these turn off and it pulls from an odds table. Now this is that odds table. Do not affect either of these 2 columns right here, but in this column, you can affect the percentage likelihood of each of these types of loot when set to custom. So apparel, there will be a 100% chance that apparel can be generated, 85% for cash, consumables, and so forth. You can change these odds however you would like to. And they do not need to add up to any sort of cumulative, just make sure they're each between 0 and 100%. The higher the percentage, the more likely that type of loot is going to be spawned in the results. Here you have the odds tables for the room details. So you have room trap chance, if set to maybe, room occupied chance if set to maybe, and room creature chance. 30, 30, and 10. You can change those percentages as long as they're between 0 and 100%. Again, these will only come into play if you have these set to maybe. If these are set to yes or no, then it will completely ignore this table. This table is where you can set the DC range for easy, medium, and hard items. So remember back over here we had easy, medium, and hard. How do we get the DCs that are generated in these three areas? From this table. If the item is generated in the easy column, it will have a DC between 8 and 12. If it's generated in the medium column, 13 and 17, hard is 18 to 22. You can change these numbers. All this does is it picks a random number between this and that. And so you can change whatever you want in these two cells. Just make sure that the minimum is equal to or less than the maximum in all three of these different difficulties. You can ignore this gray box, that's just part of the function. And that's it for the settings and functions of Burgle. Let's jump to the types of loot. And this is where we get to determine what type of stuff is generated based upon different factors. Here in column H, we have the master list of all the items that can be generated. Now I'm just going to scroll down really quick, and you can see that we have a list of about 440 items that are in this master list. And you can add or remove to this list however you would like to. So for example, let's say you didn't want a +1 shield to be in the list. How do you get rid of that? Well, if you just press delete, that's not going to work because you still have all of this data right here that is assigned to whatever is in this cell. But now there's nothing in that cell, and that's going to break the function of the generator. So rather than just pressing delete, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to select the whole row from column G, this is column G, all the way across to column P. You're going to want to select all of that data, and then you're going to right click, delete cells, shift up. Now there's no extra data in there that's not assigned to the right thing, and that will allow the generator to function appropriately. So that's how you remove something from the list if you don't want it in the list. But how do you add something to the list if there's more stuff you want here? Just scroll down to the bottom and you can just type in whatever you want to. You can make as many entries in this list as you want to. You don't need to add anything in column G. Column G is already done and ready for you to add stuff in. If you should happen to add enough stuff where you get down here to row 482 and there's not any more zeros in these columns, all you have to do is select column G, cell 482. You get that little black plus in the bottom right corner when you hover your mouse over the blue square, and you can just drag that down and that will work. So you can continue, essentially you can add as many items as you want to. You can have 10,000 items in this list if you want to. It'll all still work. Whatever you add to column H and its requisite details are potentials for being generated in the results on the other tab. Okay, so what's going on with all of these other details in columns I through P? For each item, in this case, let's examine the adamantine armor. For each item, you have the wealth of the person who might have this item. Given the adamantine armor is what it is in D&D 5e, I determined that only somebody of upper class would have that item. And so I selected upper class. Now you have the drop-down menu. You can select impoverished, lower, middle, or upper. So for example, the armor of gleaming is selected as a middle class. Now this means that any target of middle class or higher may have an armor of gleaming. So it's not that only middle class people or targets will have the armor of gleaming. It's middle class and higher. If we scroll down a ways and we come to this block and tackle, an impoverished person might easily have some fishing gear or something, but that again, that doesn't mean that only impoverished people will get block and tackle in their generated results. You could have anybody from impoverished to low to middle to upper class that could have that item in their results. Back up here to adamantine armor, you can determine the wealth of the target who might have that item. You've got its category, but it's this category column J, does not affect the generator at all. This was just something that I added for additional sorting and data tracking. Nothing in this column affects the generator at all. You could delete column J if you wanted to. I have it in there because I like the additional details. And that's what this little black triangle up here in this note says, by the way. If you hover your mouse over the black triangle, you get a little pop-up that explains that. Any cell that you see on the sheet that has a black triangle in the top right corner, if you hover your mouse over that, it'll give you some additional details on what that thing is and how it affects the generator. It's a good idea to read those to make sure you don't make any mistakes. Back to our adamantine armor. What type of loot is it? If we look back at the generator itself, remember we have our types of loot: apparel, cash, consumables, blah, 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 magic items. And so we put the adamantine armor under magical items. Now, granted, it could also go under apparel, but I thought it was more appropriate for it to be considered a magical item. But maybe you disagree with me, so you can come in and just change its designation to apparel or whatever you wanted to. You can do that with all of these. And so now that I've changed this to apparel, if apparel is generated, there's the potential of the adamantine armor being generated from that apparel designation. Now for these next 5 columns, this is where you designate what type of room might you find the given item in. In this case, back to the adamantine armor, I said that you might find the adamantine armor in the bedroom or in a storage or cellar area. But maybe you thought that it would make sense for it to be in the foyer, hall, or sitting. Well, you just add that in. Do you want it in the kitchen and dining? Do you want it in the office or study? So there's one column for each of the 5 locations or target rooms. Again, target rooms were right here in the generator. And so there's one column for each of those. And so you can decide which location you want each item to potentially be found in. So that is how you customize the Burgle generator for all of the items that are available, where they might be found, the target wealth of who might have that item, and so forth. Again, don't affect or change the G column with all the gray zeros. That's part of the function of the generator. If you scroll right a little bit, you see these 4 columns over here: target room, draw list, all that kind of stuff. Do not affect anything or change anything in columns Q through T. That's all part of the function of the generator, so leave those alone. If you scroll right a little bit more though, we do see we have our cache section, and this is where the cache of the target is generated. So you have potential gold, potential silver, and potential copper. And how much might they have if they're impoverished, if they're lower class, if they're middle class, or if they're upper class. So you can, this is another min-max table. You can change these numbers however you want to, as long as the minimums are less than or equal to the maximums. Same thing with silver, same thing with copper. And this little table down here is how you affect how likely is the cache to be easy to get, medium to get, or hard to get. So currently it's set to, it's 50% likely for the cache to be over here in the hard column, which means it'll have the difficult DC, but there is a 10% chance that it'll be easy or 40% chance that it'll be medium. You can change these odds as long as they add up to 100%. Ignore these gray cells underneath, it's part of the function. And that's it for the settings for the burglary generator. If we jump over to Pickpocket, you'll see that a lot of things are very similar in their function. Here again, we have the type of loot and their percentages when set to custom. Just like Burglary, you can change those numbers. Ignore all of this stuff, that's part of the functionality. And then we have the DC range to see and the DC range to lift. This is a min-max for easy items, min-max for hard items. Min-max for easy, min-max for hard. So just like the Burglary, same idea, you can change those numbers. And then let's take a look at the loot table, and you'll see that this looks extremely similar. You have this list of loot that a person might be able to pickpocket. There are a lot of things from the Burgle list that aren't in the Pickpocket list because it would be harder to pickpocket the adamantine armor off of the back of somebody who's wearing it, right? So there's a lot of things that are not on this list that were in the Burglary list, but otherwise it functions the exact same. You've got the type of loot, you've got the note for it, and then similarly you have the 7 different types of people who might have that item on them. So for example, we have the Sentinel Shield, which is a magic item, and we might expect an adventurer and a martial combatant to have that item on them. We probably wouldn't have a clergy or a commoner or a magical combatant or an elite or a scholar. If you disagree, then just come on here. Maybe you think, well, I think an elite could have that. Okay, we'll just turn on elite. And now anytime that you have designated that an elite is being pickpocketed, there's the potential for the Sentinel shield to be on that person. Just like I explained with the burglary function, you can add or remove to this table however you would like to, as well as changing the designators of who might have it or what type of loot it is. Also, again, ignore these 3 columns with the draw lists. That's all part of the function. And then again, we have our cache section that functions exactly like it did over in the burglary section. You've got your type of people, how much gold might that person have on them, how much silver, how much copper. It's a min-max table. You can ignore all of these gray cells. And then what are the odds of the cache that that person is carrying being harder to lift? Remember, we had easier loot and harder loot. So it's set right now to there's a 60% chance that the cache that they're carrying will be harder, which means a 40% chance that it will be easier. You can change that number anywhere between 0 and 100%. And that is it for the customization of the illegal acquisitions generator. Thank you very much for watching. Remember, I have dozens of other generators, so be sure to check them out here on YouTube or at buymeacoffee.com. Please like and subscribe this video if you enjoyed it, and happy gaming.